Hey everybody, we are Martin, Robert, and Francis, and this is Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hey everybody, welcome back to Snakes and Otters. This is episode 65. I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
So this week, guys, is a My Heroes episode, and for the three of us, this is a biggie. This is the big hero. This is Ronaldus Maximus. This is Ronald Reagan, the formative president when we were teenagers and young adults. We are children of the 80s.
Proudly so.
It would stand to figure that Ronnie would be big in our pantheon.
Absolutely.
So a couple of quick things, guys. Anything, a couple of quick statements. Then I'll do the quickie bio.
I've always found Reagan to be so much of a leader. He had a quality about him, and I don't know that we could ever truly understand or even quantify it. But the people, they may have opposed him, but they all respected him. And as a general rule, he brought back a like for the presidency, at least the man in the office, and that's not something we'd seen before, really, since JFK or Roosevelt before him. I'd say Eisenhower and Truman maybe, but
Eisenhower more so than Truman.
Right. It was. It's something that I think is worth exploring, because the 80s were a formative time, and they were also a dangerous time. Especially in the early 80s, during the Cold War, the height of the Soviet Union, until Gorbachev came to power. We didn't know at the time that when he came to power, things started to thaw. But before that, they were very, very dangerous. Robert?
Yeah. So for me, my big thing with him has always been his attitude and the inspirational aspect to his character and his presidency. He brought back a sense of positivity about the country, about our future, about where we were going, even despite coming out of the 80s. The hostages came home from Iran right as he was sworn in. So he had a clean sweep of everything negative almost right before he started. And he didn't have to deal with that stuff, which is a great bonus, but it was also partially because the Iranians didn't want to deal with him. But he had just a great way of inspiring people to think positively about the future, that things were going to be better than they had been.
Mm-hmm. That's very important. He
very important.
It made us feel better about ourselves and believe in ourselves, and then in turn believe that not only would the future be better, but that we deserved that future.
Yeah.
That the country could be better. Again, like you said, coming out of Vietnam, coming out of Watergate, coming out of hearings about the intelligence community that painted a very negative light on that. And he said, we can be, not only can the future be better, but, we deserve to have a better future because America can be a great place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who says that? Nobody says that anymore. Nobody says that before. He was unique with that. And daggone it, we needed that. We always need that. And we should always get that. And rarely do we.
Yeah. So, of course, the bio is fairly well known, but I'll hit the highlights. He's a Midwesterner, of course, born in Illinois, lived in Illinois. February 6th, 1911, Tampico, Illinois. Family moved around quite a bit, and he was strongly influenced by his mother, who was a very religious person, and a leader, not just a religious person, but a leader in her faith, in her church. So that connection of not just being religious, but being someone who led others in seeking that faith was important. And of course, went to a very small college, and became a sports announcer, very famously announcing for the Chicago Cubs, and then went into acting and became a very famous film actor, eventually becoming president of the Screen Actors Guild. So he was a union leader, a union man. Then became very well known on television during the early days of TV in the late 50s and early 60s. You know, these kind of anthology type shows were important, and he was the host of General Electric Theater, and it was a very popular television show. And then moved into politics. You know, very famously endorsing Barry Goldwater for president in 1964, leaving the Democratic Party he'd been a part of most of his adult life, and immediately shook up the scene with his endorsement of Barry Goldwater in 1964, and very soon after that became governor of California.
The first actor to become the governor of California. Yes. Not the last, of course, as we all remember. Ronald, yes. Destined to bear the jeweled crown of California upon a troubled brow, as they say. I've been waiting to use that for a while, by the way.
Yeah. And George, going from governor of California, then he ran for president in 1976. Came close, but...
came close.
Yeah.
Hard to imagine against an incumbent president.
Yeah, Gerald Ford pulled out all the stops and did all the things he needed to do to get the delegates swayed, and got the nomination. But it's widely said that the delegates left that convention thinking they nominated the wrong fella. After Reagan gave an impromptu speech at the end of the convention. And during the 70s, he did a radio commentary, kind of the 1970s equivalent of a podcast.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's right.
So, and then 1980 was elected president. And was very much an outsider in his own party. He was different. He wanted to break from kind of that Nixon, Kissinger, Ford sort of group that had been in charge of the party, since the 60s. And he wanted to make a break from that and look at things in a different way and approach not just foreign policy but domestic policy differently than his party had in the past. And the 80s became a time of prosperity. I remember it very clearly that, hey, my dad's not changed jobs or anything, but, there's money. The economy's picking up. And, inflation dropped considerably.
Oh, yeah.
I think from
God,
12% to 4%.
Dropped, interest rates dropped.
Yes.
One of the things that, again, we don't want to be political because that's not the thing, but there tends to be, in this day and age, very much a rewriting of the economic history of the 80s. And one of the things that I remember very clearly, you saw the greatest movement from the poorest 20% up.
Yes.
Out of poverty and into the upper echelons. Now, of course, that means you're also going to see a corresponding drop by some into that 20%, but the point was there's lots of movement up. And that was not, you didn't see that. Those who were the poorest got better off.
Yeah.
And
some of it's due to the comparison to how bad the things were in the late 70s, because you had gas wars, you had oil prices through the roof, gas lines were awful, interest rates. You're talking 12, 13, 11%, which we haven't had that. Yeah, exactly. It was awful. 21%. I mean, at places. And can you imagine that today? We haven't had that since that time, and God hopes we never do. But we really almost had nowhere to go but up. However, it could have certainly stayed that way under the wrong leadership. And Robert, I really like your layout of he made it. It made us proud to be an American again. I mean, the space program came back. I remember when the Challenger, one of the Challenger launches took, one of the space shuttle launches. I don't think it was Challenger, Columbia probably, early in the '80s, and they showed pictures of people watching that, and you all of a sudden heard this one guy stand up on camera and scream, "USA, USA!" And I said, "What? Nobody does that. This is the time of post-Watergate, post-Vietnam, post-inflation, all this stuff. Nobody does that." That was a sign of the times. That was shows how the wind had shifted and change had come. And we were definitely the better for it.
Yeah. You know, and Francis and Robert, you both bring up something important here. Again, we want to stress this is not a political analysis. Of course, you have to brush on the politics a bit, but we don't want to get into a political analysis. We don't want to comment on current politics.
No.
This is a history sort of thing for us, and we want to communicate to the listeners what Ronnie meant to us. Mm-hmm. Again, as young adults in the 80s, we were prime beneficiaries of these changes.
Right, absolutely.
You know, we saw the difference firsthand. And becoming young adults, we're cognizant of job markets and wages and all of that stuff.
Sure. And anybody who comes into that young adulthood and early, late teens, early 20s, whoever is in office influences them strongly. And that is something that we talked about in the show prep, which is everybody carries their own nostalgia. That's a bad word. I don't like that here because it's far deeper than that. It's not just some sort of longing for something that once was. It's formation. You are formed by all of a sudden we understand the world. And
this is what it is. What you're looking for, it's a common touchstone for the people of the day. Mm-hmm. And that's what he was.
Yeah. There you go. Of course, you always say it best, Robert.
So many things that he did that outside of the political realm, that is what I think makes him worthy of admiration. He brought a sense of optimism, and he brought a sense that instead of being ashamed of the country, we became proud of the country again.
Amen. Exactly.
And that
had been gone a long time.
What?
That had been gone a long time. It was not in our memory of ever being proud. Right.
I mean, for us, our memories start in the 70s. Basically, they start with, at best, the last half of the first part, of Nixon's first term. But more likely, it's really probably going to be Watergate, and then that's going to form the rest of the 70s. And it's such a difference. Jimmy Carter talked about a malaise taking over the country, and that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And Reagan's Morning in America, now granted that's his second campaign, the Morning in America slogan, and talking about how great things can be, not necessarily how great things are, but how great things can be. Yeah. It's such a difference maker. It really is.
Presidents, I think, are at their best when they're constantly asking us to look to the future and make things better. And so many of them don't do that. Reagan was one of the shining stars that always did that. And that's one of the reasons I think he's such a hero, certainly.
Yeah.
Well, and in the pre-show, Francis brought up something that's super important that we're kind of touching on, that we're brushing on. It's his ability to communicate these things to us.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And he was called the Great Communicator. Again, he knew how to speak to people. The radio addresses, again, very unique every week for, I think it was close to 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
on
I think
the
his
radio.
acting background helped too, because he understood the need to communicate concisely and precisely. But hey, he came across as non-political in his speech. Now that's something that's heightened a lot since then, where everything is simply double speak. It's political speak. Mm-hmm. Reagan had a tendency to act like and be perceived as if he's speaking to a regular guy to regular people, but never pejoratively or never condescendingly. As I'm one of you, you're one of me, and we're going to do this together. Well, that's leadership, was absolutely.
Yeah, and then even as president, of course, the one that stands out the most is the Challenger disaster speech.
Oh yes,
absolutely. We were in college when that happened.
Yeah.
I can still remember. We all have those touchstone moments when something like that happens. I was on my way to production management, of all things, the day that happened. It happened just as I was getting ready to leave, so I didn't really get a chance to hear all the details.
Yes, I still remember being stopped going into, I believe it was Fraser Hall, and an acquaintance said, "Have you heard? That the shuttle blew up." And, huh? What?
What? Yeah.
That doesn't happen. That's not possible.
Yeah. I was in the newspaper office, the Concord, typing up a paper, and they had a little black and white 13-inch in there, and ended up leaving and going to the other end of Fraser, and the television by the doors up on the upper level.
Yep.
And that was my first good shot of it. But
yep.
I didn't see it live, thank God. I don't think I would have wanted to. But it's almost worse seeing it later, because then you watch it over and over and over. Yeah, his leadership at that moment was critical, and that speech really was phenomenal. I forget who the poet was that he quoted when he talked about how astronauts slipped the surly bonds of Earth and touched the face of God. That's the quote that everybody remembers from that. It's not his words, but he used them in a perfect context.
Effectively, yeah. And he reminded us that these things have risks. We tend to think of them as routine by that time, but they do have risks, but the risks are worth it because we're seekers. Humans are seekers. And he said, remember that the future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted, it belongs to the brave.
That's right.
So that's still one that is very much right up in here when we talk about our quotes for Code of Honor. That's on my list. That's one that's up here in my head all the time.
That's right. Fortune favors the bold, as Captain Benjamin Sisko would remind us too. See, you were wondering where Star Trek was going to come in. This was Ronnie was also pre-Next Generation too. He was. It was literally his last year in office. 80. Yeah, exactly. It was. But it was October of '87 when it hit. You remember I was over at your house and I couldn't eat the pizza because I had my wisdom teeth to get out. Never will forget that day. It's lots changed since that time. The world has changed. This is before the internet, for goodness sakes. And our younger listeners will listen, and of course they know that there is such a thing as a time without. But
I think they presume that was before electricity, though.
That's true. That was the previous century. Come on, it's the 20th century. That's just silliness.
Well, that's also.
It is a silly place.
Another interesting thing is, technology takes off in the 80s.
Yeah, it's true. That's right. All that we knew born in the 90s was conceived in the 80s.
Yeah, and I've always thought that the economic changes, again, when you talk about tax reductions and interest rate reductions, what happens with that money? Well, it gets invested in things, and one of the things that got invested in was technology. One of the things that you can't underestimate, and granted this is going a little bit towards the political, because it's always political when you talk about this, but
the capital gains tax cut unlocked a massive amount of wealth in stocks that had been sitting there untapped, because as soon as you sell the stock, you had to pay a horrendous tax. I think it was 50%. Yep. And nobody wanted to sell their stock and lose half their gains. And when it was cut and all of that money was suddenly freed up to invest in new ventures, that can't be underestimated, what that did. That fueled the economic boom of the 90s. And without it, there would not have been the 90s that we knew.
Yeah.
And the other thing that he did, the simplification of the tax code in 86 was a massive thing. One of the things he was most proud of, and modern conservatives, quote unquote, would despise this if you didn't tell him Reagan said it, but he was proudest of how many people he removed from the tax rolls and the lower incomes by helping them, by removing them from the tax rolls. And today I think most conservatives would say, well, oh, they got to pay their fair share too, because we've lost our way. But again, that's a political thing. Don't want to go there.
Don't want to go there.
But these are the kind of things that were far-reaching, that maybe he didn't see the exact benefit that was going to come, but he pushed for them and ended up being a really good thing.
Yeah, we still really live in a Reagan economy. We still really live with the changes he made. Those are considered, that's the only thing we could do. Nobody's suggesting going back to this 50s, 60s, and 70s era of high interest rates and all that.
Well, no, but they are suggesting going back to extremely high taxes and other things. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
I think there's a great push to go back towards that.
But no, a tax increase to 35% would be, a huge fight, let alone going to 50, 60, 70% that it had been in the past.
Right.
So everything we do, everything we are in these past 40 years are still built on his theories and his
foundation.
The economy that he built of moderate tax rates and letting people keep their money and do what they want with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really,
a large deal.
I think he had a really good balance of, these are things that the government can and should do, and these are things that the people should do. Now, we can always argue whether or not that was the perfect balance, because obviously it wasn't. Mm-hmm. But because there is no such thing as a perfect balance when it comes to these sorts of things. It's too messy. But he really wanted to enable the little guy. We've lost this in a lot of today's talk in politics and leadership and societal leadership. And that is, Reagan was all for mom and pop businesses, small businesses. In the 80s, that was one of the things that they touted the most, that drove the economy was small business growth, not big business growth. And we don't talk about that anymore because that's not where it's coming from. But he saw that was the best way to go, because it gave primary ownership of things to the little people, to mom and pop shops, to small businesses, to small startups. And that's what drives, or at least then drove, the economy.
He was touting the virtues of staying local long before anybody else would have done it. He didn't use that language, but ultimately that's what he's talking about here. As much as that, there were no the landscape was very, very different in the 80s too, both business and foreign policy. We haven't talked much on that. One of the things that always struck me is, you guys remember the movie The Day After, don't you?
Yes.
Oh, yes. It scared the absolute dog crap out of me. I won't watch it ever again. I saw it when it came on. That was in the early 80s. I believe I was still in high school.
1983.
Yeah, and it was that was also a formative specter for all of us. The fact that the Cold War is so hot, potentially, that we could all be wiped out. And there was a lot of talk about that. and we were worried. We were always worried. The Cuban Missile Crisis being the closest we ever came, that's outside our memory and our experience. Nevertheless, we were afraid of the boogeyman, of the Soviet monster. And it was under Reagan that changed. And I'm not going to give Reagan all that credit, but it was his watch when things started to change. And he had something to do with that. There were many forces that did that. My research in recent years says it was inevitable. It was just who was going to be there when it happened. You can't have a totalitarian monolith like the Soviet Union survive. It's just no way. We didn't realize that, though. We thought they were this everlasting boogeyman. And Reagan showed us that, no, we don't have to think that way. We can realize that they are people, too. And we're going to call on them. God forbid, we actually call them out on their problems and saying, no, you need to treat your people better. No, tear down that wall, Mr. Gorbachev.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this
exactly.
wall.
There's so many things that people before would have said, what are you doing? But ultimately,
yes, calling the Soviet Union the evil empire was one of the most controversial things that he did.
Very much so, yeah.
And it was born out of a honest belief that Soviet communism was evil. And if you don't understand that it was an evil system, you don't understand what it was. He was right.
That's exactly right.
One of the most oppressive regimes, especially one that was as influential. Most oppressive regimes tend to be smaller because it's easier to oppress a smaller group of people. And that's what makes the fact that the Soviet Union lasted as long as it did, as brutal as it was, kind of amazing, because that kind of brutality almost can't last that long normally.
Well, it's a testament to the Russian people that they were able to survive it and to eventually overthrow it. And not just the Russians, but all the Eastern Europeans that were there, the Lithuanians, Latvians, Ukrainians, and so many others. The Poles, absolutely. It was so, exactly, and that's just something they realized. They had hitched their wagon to an evil star because ultimately
let's face it, their wagon was hitched. They didn't hitch it.
That's correct. That's right. Once the Bolsheviks took power, there's no going back, and it was. Well, I was going to say almost that. We're gonna do a Russian Revolution, the fall of the Soviet Union episode later on this summer, or is it next summer? I forget.
So next summer. This summer.
I was going to say we're almost done because I think that's something that needs a lot more explanation, a lot more. People don't know that well, and I was shocked that the fall of the Soviet Union is not as known as it should be. It's kind of like, oh, well, that was a thing, and it's not a thing anymore. And I'm thinking, no, wait a minute, folks. Perspective and vision, you missed it. It really, just because they're way over there doesn't mean that it didn't matter. But anyway, I've gone down a rabbit hole, boys. I certainly didn't mean to. You know how we are. Well, maybe it's time for bourbon.
Yeah,
we haven't even talked about our bourbon.
Yeah, as captain, I'm going to interrupt a little bit. And I have broken out the old tub, which, again, is very, very smooth. What did we describe it as? 100 proof? Or what did you hear? Basil Hayden. 100 proof Basil Hayden is what Robert's heard it described as. And I'll sign that. It's good. It's good.
That's what I'm drinking as well. It's been my thing the last few times here. Unfiltered. Which is something that you don't really realize. Looking at the bottle, it doesn't particularly look cloudy, but it does a little bit in the glass. And that's not a bad thing. It takes just it's kind of like it gives a robustness to what it's got. It's like you're getting the unedited version of the film, so to speak, and you get the fullness of the intention, whatever the director intended. That's kind of the way I look at this. It's very, very good, very, very good. It's a recent acquisition for all of us. We just kind of who was it that found it? Robert, was it you that discovered it?
Yes, my former pastor had it pointed out to him, and I brought it to our attention.
That's right. That's what I couldn't remember. It seems like that that was months ago, but it's definitely on my repertoire and shall be for some time. Because until we get together again, can't drink the whole darn thing myself, boys. We used to drink a lot of bourbon when we actually got together physically, but now it's just okay, maybe not, because we're still virtual at this point. Although that's about to change. Next month we plan on being back together again, live, as they say.
Yes, we're very hopeful that the days of the virtual recording will be going by the wayside, and we'll be able to rejoin the brotherhood of snakes and otters in fellowship. So, Robert, right. what have you got a glass of?
I sat down. We started before I could grab one.
Oh, no.
Goodness. Oh, I apologize. We have rushed into things.
Do we need to take a break and let you pour a glass? Or?
No.
I was going to say, Martin and I can hold the fort if you for a moment or two while you want to go grab something real quick.
What, and let you talk about me behind my back?
We would never do that. We're recording this for posterity. You would listen to it, we know. So if you don't hear it today, you'll hear it later.
That's actually one of the things that I really don't. I rarely go back and listen. I am so far behind in listening to what.
Really?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, it's enjoyable in those times when I do, but. I've heard it. And the funny thing is, when I do listen to us, as we're talking, obviously I remember some of the conversation. Sometimes it's months after when I get around to it. And I'll have a response coming in my head. And it turns out that's exactly what I say.
Yeah, I found myself doing the same thing. I said, I should say this. Oh, I did just say that. Okay, yeah.
So I come to find out that maybe I don't need to listen to it because I said everything I needed to say.
Well, you recorded it in your head. So, what better recording device do you need, right?
Exactly.
Well, as just a plug for some of the last few episodes, because I have been listening to some of the stuff that's been published lately. Listeners, again, we publish every Friday at noon. All the platforms, whatever your favorite platform is, jump on it and find us. But we just dropped a few episodes ago, Planet of the Apes. Yeah. That was a terrific discussion that Francis led, and we did a very silly Is Cereal a Soup episode there a few weeks ago, and that was very fun and goofy. And,
that was a Robert idea, if I remember right.
Yeah, and we turned up some really horrible things people used to eat in the 70s. So
that's true.
Well, we were children of the 70s. Come on, you kind of got to go with what you know, as Bill Adama would say. So, hey.
So that was another great thing about the 80s. People stopped trying to combine like tuna and Jell-O. Look, we got money now. We don't have to eat that kind of garbage. We're going to eat real food.
Right.
So, guys, I got a few years ago, I came across a story online, and it's become one of my favorite Reagan stories. And it's told by I believe, a Reagan biographer by the name of Paul Kengor, Kengor.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells the story of Bill Clark, one of Reagan's advisors, who early in Reagan's presidency was the national security advisor. And Bill Clark is also from California, I believe. And he was, again, you can kind of know people by the people that are around them. And Bill Clark didn't act like a big-time political what would you call it? Big-time political wahoo type person. He was assigned a driver, a GSA driver, and instead of sitting in the back and never speaking to that driver, he used to sit up front in the car and ride around and actually speak to the man. And the driver. One of the things about Washington, D.C. and being, almost every employer is the government. African Americans moved from the South and Virginia to D.C. to get jobs. And Bill Clark's driver was a black man from Georgia, who had survived Jim Crow and survived the oppression of the South and moved to D.C., and his name was Joe Bullock. And Joe Bullock and Bill Clark became pretty good friends. And, the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s was a time when kind of the pop culture moment was cowboy stuff. Sort of urban cowboy and country music.
Yeah.
Yes. Some things that might perhaps better be forgotten, but were very popular at the time. John Travolta in a cowboy hat. Look it up, folks. Google it, Urban Cowboy. It was actually a bit of a mediocre movie, but it was a political. It was a cultural thing. Yeah, it was a big deal. Everybody was wearing cowboy boots and hats after that movie, of all things.
Yeah, Deborah Winger and Scott Glenn, and it was a big deal.
Yes, Johnny Lee, looking for love in all the wrong places. That's where that song came from, and that's where
got its big start.
That's right.
Yeah. Riding bulls and gillies down in Texas, the whole bit. Yeah. But Bill Clark's father had given Joe Bullock a Western-style belt, and I think even I had one of these in the early 70s with the leather with different colors, and they'd stamp your name in the back of it and designs and all this kind of stuff. So Joe Bullock loved this Western belt and showed it off all the time under his suit jacket. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were going to be making a state visit, and protocol meant gifts. So, White House meeting, President, Vice President, Bill Clark, a couple other people trying to decide what they should get Prince Philip as a gift for this state visit. And Clark suggested one of these Western belts, and Reagan really didn't know what that was. What do you mean by a Western belt? And again, they're Californians, they're ranchers, and Clark said, "Well, my driver Joe has one on. Let's call him up here." So again, this is a gentleman. All he's ever done, is drive these figures around D.C. He's never been really within 50 yards of anybody in, the Oval Office or anything. But they call him up there, and there he stands in the middle of the Oval Office with the president, the vice president, and he starts crying. Mm. And they all freeze. George Bush, Bill Clark, they all freeze. But Reagan walks over to him, pats him on the shoulder, and says, "Well, Mr. Bullock, I understand you've got a belt to show me." Breaks the ice, and just that human touch, understanding that this is a man who's been through so much, and then this moment is overwhelming, and just kind of comes to the rescue. And I always thought that was this terrific story that really showed that, on the inside, say what you want, on the inside he was a genuine, decent person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that.
What was that?
I think that's even if you don't know that story, but if you were around when Reagan was president, I think you would understand that, and you felt that even.
Okay, I saw the gestures, but I didn't know what you were.
Yeah, I mean, you could feel that even if you didn't know that story.
Right. Well, if you were around then, and especially if you had any kind of knowledge of the man or paid any attention to him, that story rings true. Yeah. You have no trouble believing that story.
That's right. It's consistent with what his public face was.
Right. He was able. That was what made him the great communicator. Was he was able to do that one-on-one. Take a guy who, as you said, came from some of the humblest beginnings and was overwhelmed with emotion at standing in the Oval Office in front of the president and the vice president, something that, he never would have thought it would be possible, even as a driver for one of these lower muckety mucks, but still one of the muckety ones. And, I can easily see him getting up and coming around because you were just people to him, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if it bothered him not that he was uncomfortable about it, but but this guy Joe was uncomfortable or was so overwhelmed.
Yeah, he understood another person's distress.
Yeah, and that that's an amazing thing. Now, I think one of the things you have to also bring up with Reagan is his family life. Now, of course, he was the only divorced president up until recently. He was the first one to be divorced. Of course, Nancy was the longtime love of his life. They were inseparable, and she was his biggest fan, and he was her biggest fan.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he had kids from the first marriage as well as the second. Not all of them got along. It wasn't all rosy, but that was kind of typical. I think that made him kind of relatable.
Yeah, it did. It very much so. Yeah, all families have issues, and his was no different. And that actually, I think, endeared him to the people. The people loved Reagan as a general rule. They may have disagreed with him, even his political opponents, but they at least talked. They at least worked through stuff. That was, we see that as you would never do that today, and yet that was commonplace at his time. Not just his time, but before that time.
Yeah, he was one of, not the last, but one of the last presidents who could work across the aisle. We don't have that anymore. We've talked about that and lamented that greatly. There's no need to go over that again.
Mm-hmm.
But he was one of the last. You got a little bit of it with George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush, Bush the elder, but not as much because the war was very divisive. Obviously, and plus he was a one-term president. As we said with Bush, his biggest mistake was not holding the war closer to the election because he was massively popular after it. But probably Clinton's first term, just 10 years, not even 10 years, 8 years after Reagan, and that conviviality, that ability to work across the aisle was gone. From Clinton's second term on, it was no holds barred, all the gloves were off. And I don't blame the Republican Congress for that. I blame both sides for that.
Right. Well, we've talked about it before. When you style your political enemy as the devil, you don't make a deal with the devil.
Right.
You just can't. You destroy the devil, and that's where we're at today.
And that's the thing about Reagan. The devil, the evil, was not inside the country. It was our foreign opponents. It was the evil empire, the Soviets. He never wavered on that. That is what brought down the Soviet Union. He did not see his political opponents in this country as evil to be forever destroyed. And, to me, that's just one of the great things about it.
Yeah. That's another one of my favorite stories, too, is he met in person with congressmen all the time.
Yeah.
Wouldn't just stand there and call names. He actually tried to meet with people, and he was trying to convince a Democratic congressman, to vote for one of the economic reform package bills, and the congressman said, "Well, I'm not sure. I'm going to go pray about it." And Reagan said, "Well, if you get a busy signal, that's just me in there ahead of you."
I remember that story.
We prayed for it too. So he could just. You're right. It was not about demonizing the other side. It was about politics as compromise, as what it's supposed to be built as.
Yes, work together to get things done.
Yeah,
that was the intention.
Yeah,
and recognize that everybody can win. You just can't win completely, maybe. But everybody can win if you work together.
But he also wasn't afraid to win in his own right, straight out. And again,
that's correct.
The defining moment early in his presidency is the air traffic controller strike.
Yeah, I was. You had mentioned that in the show prep. I was hoping you were going to get to that because that was unheard of. He did what? That was, people would say he overreached, but the proof is in the pudding. In the end, everything changed for the better, and that's amazing that he was able to get away with it.
Yeah. Well, he strongly felt that public service unions should not be able to strike. Again, he was a union leader, so he believed in unions.
They gave him credibility, yes.
So he believed in collective bargaining, and he wanted to collective bargain, with the air traffic controllers. But he did not believe that a public union could go on strike, and when they did, he said, "Well, everybody that doesn't come back to work is fired." And it seemed it was this very decisive moment, something that strongly contrasted, I think, with people's experience with both Ford and Carter.
Yeah, they would have absolutely never done anything like that, and people would have just said, you think, what?
Yeah.
Interesting thing, a good deal of those air traffic controllers that did not come back, who were fired, were quietly rehired sometime later. That's not commonly talked about. So even in winning, he was magnanimous.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's how you do it.
He did have a lot of wins. He had some losses too. He lost his way a little bit on the Iran-Contra affair. He let his advisors talk him into things, as well as you're in power for 6 years. You probably get the idea that you can do whatever you need to, no matter who you are. It's not just him, not just any other president, but did some things that shouldn't have gone down the way they did. And if it had happened in his first term, he never would have gotten reelected. Yeah. But the interesting thing is, by the time the end of the second term comes along, most people think he could have won a third term. So even though he had that happen in the middle of the second term, which is probably one of the main reasons why the Republicans lost the Senate in that second term, he probably still could have won a third term in 1988, which is just astounding.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very valid criticism of his management style. He put down a set of principles or ideas and then let other people carry off with them without really, getting into details on everything. I guess it could be argued that it's kind of hard for a president to be in the details of everything that's going on in an administration.
But that's the thing, though. That was one of his greatest strengths. But as is often the case, your greatest strength is also one of your greatest weaknesses.
Yeah.
Because one of his greatest strengths was, this is the vision, this is the goal, this is what we want. And then from there, he trusted people to do the right thing. And maybe this is a little bit naive of him at the national level to think that everybody underneath him shared those same ideals and goals and values. Yeah. And they don't all do share those same. And even if they do, sometimes they think the methods are worth the risk. And that's not always the case.
Right.
And, so it's a great strength, but it can be a great weakness because, as you say, a president can't really follow up on all the details. He's got to trust the people he puts in place. And I think he was, one of the great phrases that people still use is we attribute to him, trust but verify. And the verify is where we kind of fell short that time.
Yeah, the old Russian proverb that he used with Gorbachev after the INF treaty was signed. The first president in history to reduce the number of nuclear arms. Yep. Provia no oh man, I wish I could remember how to say it in Russian. I can't remember how to say it in Russian. It's like Provia no stovia or something like that. Trust but verify.
Trust but verify.
So, well, fellas, we're hitting at about 50 minutes here, which seems like short shrift for Ronaldus Maximus, but I fear that we could go on for hours and hours and hours. So.
Oh, we could. I mean, we didn't even talk about his political career in California. We didn't talk about his time as head of the Actors Guild Union, Screen Actors Guild. And we didn't talk about his time as a movie star. I mean, he wasn't an A-lister, but he was famous.
He was pretty close.
Yeah.
He was pretty close to an A-lister, so he was
I mean, he was close. He was up for a couple of roles that some others were famous for, but he didn't get. I think he was up for some Errol Flynn roles that he didn't get, and who knows if the roles had been reversed and Reagan had gotten them, how things would have gone differently.
Yeah.
But,
he and Flynn starred together in Santa Fe Trail. Actually, they knew each other fairly well, and it's actually a very good movie.
It is.
Yeah.
And he wasn't a bad actor. He had some.
No, he was excellent.
Roles. Yeah. He had some goofy ones too. The whole Bonzo thing is just it's come on. But it's good. But it's fun.
Yeah, he was a leading man though. He was not a character actor, supporting actor all the time. I mean, later in his career he was. But during the meat of his career, he was a leading man.
Yep.
So, but you're right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Again, we just brushed on all that. We brushed on again the radio addresses. Those selection of those have been published on CD and that for years. So, listeners, if you ever get a chance to come across those somewhere, pick them up. They're amazing listening.
And they're still valid today. A lot of the points in there.
Absolutely, yeah. He's one for the ages.
Yes,
in many respects.
He was talking about stuff in 76, 77, 78 that he would do in 83, 84, and 85. And again, you're right. It's all still stuff that, to a large degree, we would recognize that stuff right now.
One thing, we didn't cover, and I think we should, because he did some firsts. First woman nominated and approved for the Supreme Court.
Yep.
Was a Ronald Reagan appointee. Mm-hmm. He restructured the court because obviously as president for 8 years you get a chance to do that to a great deal. And several of his choices served well past him. Chief Justice Rehnquist was a pick of Reagan, and he served until his death in 2005. So he did things that really had a lasting effect on the country.
Mm-hmm.
Part of being a good leader.
Yep,
that's exactly right.
And I think that's the big key right there. And again, why it's not just the accomplishments that were so formative for us. We responded to his leadership.
Yeah.
And he wanted all Americans to be equal. He wanted all Americans to have opportunity, and he wanted us to be our best. And that makes him a hero.
That's exactly right. Well said, sir. Couldn't have said it better.
Part of our fabric. So, Francis, buddy, what is up for next time?
Pop culture time next time, as we might remember, and we're going to go, it's another 80s icon, but not exclusively that, Robin Williams, the tortured genius of Robin Williams. Oh, so formative to us, and genius is unbelievably accurate. We're going to explore him, his comedy, the man, the tragedy, of course. It colors so much, but he was someone that deserves a little bit of time spent with. So we're going to do that next episode. Please join us.
Thanks for being with us here every week at Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Be sure to spread the word on your social media accounts. Follow us and retweet us. We are on Instagram and on Twitter at Snakes and Otters.
Let your friends know that they can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just search Snakes and Otters Podcast to find us, and please remember to leave us your comments and reviews. It helps people find us.
And you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Martin.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Catch us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.